Greetings to our national audience and to those who are watching around the world. Welcome to the 15th Annual CUFI National Summit, coming to you from our national headquarters in San Antonio, Texas, because of the COVID-19 crisis. Many of you are seeing us for the first time and are wondering, who are you and what is your mission? CUFI is a national grassroots, single-issue, nonpartisan organization with over 8 million members, making us the largest pro-Israel organization in America. What is our mission? To combat every form of anti-Semitism, to strengthen U.S.-Israel relationships. We are combating BDS, which is economic anti-Semitism. What are you doing to accomplish this mission? Faith without works is dead. Based on that scripture, CUFI is very much alive. Here's what we do. We hold more than 50 events per month. CUFI on campus has a presence at more than 400 universities nationwide. We educate millions of Americans through our 8 social media channels, as well as our website, blog, and daily briefing emails. We bring 20 groups of pastors, millennial influencers, and students to Israel every year. We reach millions through The Watchman, our weekly television program on TBN, the largest Christian television network, and the Fox Business Network. We have brought 600 millennial influencers, including pastors, celebrities, professional athletes, and government staffers to Israel. Why do we support Israel? We support Israel because of God's biblical mandate to support Israel. From Genesis 1:1 to the last jot and tittle of the book of Revelation, the entire Bible is a Zionist document. The Bible teaches that the Jewish people have a divine and historical right to live in their ancient and modern homeland. Fact, the Jewish people in Israel today do not occupy the land. They own the land for more than 3,000 years. Without the Jewish people, we would not have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There would be no prophets, there would be no Bible. There would be no first family of Christianity, which would be Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. We support Israel because St. Paul taught the New Testament church in Romans 15:27, "For if the Gentiles," that would be Christians, "have been partakers of their spiritual things," that would be the Jewish people, "it is the Gentiles' duty to minister to the Jewish people in material things." Our major focus in America and around the world is anti-Semitism. The ghost of Adolf Hitler is walking across America, walking across Europe and the world. "Never again" is a slogan that is powerless and pathetic without action. Decency and self-respect alone compels us not to be silent in the face of anti-Semitism. If we do remain silent, we have neither decency nor respect. We will become, as the Bible says, quote, "salt that has lost its savor and is good for nothing but to be trodden down underfoot." Slogans do not change history. The passionate action of people united changes history. We are Christians united for Israel. Fighting anti-Semitism is a call to action. It means, as Mordecai told Esther, quote, "If you remain silent now, salvation will come to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish." Many generations ago, the Jews faced genocide because one stubborn, righteous Jewish man refused to take a knee before a brutal dictator. Strong people stand up for themselves, but stronger people stand up for other people. Ladies and gentlemen of CUFI, at home and around the world, CUFI is that stronger person standing up for Israel and the Jewish people. CUFI stands against BDS, which is economic anti-Semitism. CUFI stands against demonized madmen shooting up synagogues with high-powered rifles. CUFI stands against pro-Israel college and university students being physically attacked on campus, not on our watch. Isaiah 62:1 says, "For Zion's sake I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not remain quiet." We live in a time when every synagogue, when every Jewish community center, when every Jewish day school should have armed guards ready to defend innocent lives against anti-Semitic assassins. Anti-Semitism is war against the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is evil. As evil, it is sin. And as sin, it damns your soul. Anti-Semitism is a global cancer. You will either get the cancer or the cancer will get you. Anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's everyone's problem. We need to make this fight against anti-Semitism a joint, nonpartisan fight. Christians and Jews need to wage war together against this evil. Let's call it what it is. Anti-Semitism is Jew hatred. And we need to fight this evil darkness until it is destroyed in our Congress, in our churches, in our colleges and universities, and in our nation. To see evil and not call it evil is evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. God will not hold us guiltless. There's a payday someday for every anti-Semite. Fact, anti-Semitism is an oxymoron. Why? Because Christianity, as taught by Jesus of Nazareth, is driven by the law of love. Love your neighbor as yourself. The Bible says God is love, and those who have not love have not God. Anti-Semitism is driven by demonic hatred for God's chosen people. Fact, sweet and bitter water do not pour from the same fountain. James 3:12. Any person who says, "I am a Christian," and does not love the Jewish people is seriously deceived. God Almighty, the God who calls the stars by name, who measures space with a span of his hand, who weighs the mountains in a scale and the hills in a balance, said to Abraham, quote, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." That's God's foreign policy about Israel today. Fact, all anti-Semites live under the curse of God Almighty. Again, there is a payday someday. Anti-Semitism began in the brick pits of Egypt, where the Pharaoh, quote, "that knew not Joseph," killed Jewish male babies as a form of population control, lest the Jewish people become too numerous and powerful. It was an attempt to destroy the Jews by assimilation. Why? If all Jewish male babies were killed, Jewish girls would only have Egyptian men to marry in the future. And in one generation, the Jewish people would be wiped out by assimilation. What happened to Egypt and that Pharaoh? God sent the death angel to kill the firstborn in every Egyptian home. God sent 10 plagues and crushed the economy of Egypt forever. God drowned Egypt's army in the Red Sea and reduced Pharaoh to fish food. Hear the words, "I will curse those who curse you." That's God's promise to every anti-Semite. Where are the Persians who persecuted the Jews? They're gone. Where is Haman and his sons who built a gallows upon which to hang the Jews? They were hung on the very gallows they prepared for the Jews. They are gone. Where are the Babylonians? Gone. Where is the Grecian Empire? Gone. Where is the Roman Empire that persecuted the Christians? Gone. Where is the Ottoman Empire? Gone. Where are those goose-stepping lunatic Nazis who followed Adolf Hitler? They're gone. All of those nations are buried in the boneyard of human history. Where is Israel with that tiny piece of sacred soil at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea? Israel is alive and well. Israel is prospering and powerful. Israel in adversity is exploding with accomplishment. Israel lives. Shout it from the housetops in Jerusalem until the anti-Semites far and near hear it. Israel lives. Shout it until those tin-horn dictators in the United Nations hear it. Israel lives. Shout it until it echoes down the halls of the palaces in Iran. Israel lives. When the last battle has been fought on the sacred soil of Israel, when the last shot has been fired, the flag of Israel will be proudly flying over the ancient walls of the holy city, and the state of Israel will live forever. I want to express my profound appreciation to President Donald Trump for crushing Iran's nuclear deal. It is a very real threat to Israel's national security and to U.S. security. Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a promise made and a promise kept. Thank you, Mr. President, for moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, another promise made and a promise kept. Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, giving Israel the ability to defend itself. Thank you, Mr. President, for signing the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, making it possible for colleges and universities to lose federal funding for allowing anti-Semitism on campus. Thank you, sir. So tonight, with a fighting force of over 8 million strong, we stand together, Christians and Jews, shoulder to shoulder, united with one purpose: to crush and destroy anti-Semitism. While we cannot undo the past atrocities committed by the enemies of Israel, we can ensure that history never repeats itself. For the first time in history, Christians and Jews are united. We will shine a light on the darkness of anti-Semitism in all its forms. Light always conquers darkness. Light always conquers darkness. The poison stream of anti-Semitism is now flowing in the U.S. Congress and in our colleges and universities. Now the world's oldest hatred wears a new mask. Instead of wearing white hoods of its forefathers, today's anti-Semitism hides in plain sight, where the words like anti-Israel are used as a fig leaf for bigotry. For decades, support for Israel has transcended political party and ideology. But now, the acceptance of moral ambiguity has allowed anti-Semitism to creep into the halls of our government and beyond. When faced with anti-Semitic speech in Congress, instead of taking a bold stand against it, members of Congress are churning out sham resolutions. How long will we allow the U.S. Congress to give respectability to this anti-Semitic poison? Sham resolutions do nothing more than underscore the inability of Congress to stop fringe opinions from hijacking the national conversation. Hello, Congress. It's not a difficult question to answer. You're either willing to unequivocally oppose anti-Semitism or you're not. You're either for it or you're against it. There is no middle ground. Quit telling us when you come home to run for re-election that you are pro-Israel, when you refuse to rebuke the anti-Semitic remarks in the halls of Congress. Why don't you mention the anti-Semites by name? Why don't you remove them from your committees? Which brings us to the ever-increasing anti-Semitism in colleges and universities. On our university campus, far-left groups make alliances with radical Islamic groups to harass pro-Israel students. Yes, universities should encourage vigorous debate, but Israel Apartheid Week is sponsored intimidation. It isn't about learning or debating. It's entirely about attacking and harassing Jews because of their Jewishness. It's not coincidence, it's the goal. I say again, it's not coincidence, it's the goal. I repeat, the ghost of Hitler is walking across the college and university campuses of America smiling. Ladies and gentlemen, if we do not use our freedom to defend our freedom, we will lose our freedom. Ronald Reagan said, quote, "Freedom is not guaranteed. Every generation must fight for it." The next generation of Christians united for Israel is already engaged in the battle. Today, we have hundreds of college and university students of CUFI on campus fighting anti-Semitism in the front lines. They are shining a light on the darkness of boycott, divest, and sanctions. They are shining a light on those who use words like anti-Zionism as a smokescreen for anti-Semitism. Listen, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, these students are fighting the good fight, and they are winning that fight. In closing, our generation could not stop anti-Semitism, the world's oldest form of hatred, from being born thousands of years ago. We could not stop the Pharaoh of Egypt. We were not there. We could not stop Haman of Persia. We were not there. We could not stop the 8 Crusades of Europe, where Jews were slaughtered, raped, and robbed by someone carrying a cross. We were not there. We could not stop the Spanish Inquisition, nor could we stop the Russian pogroms. We were not there. We could not stop the unspeakable horrors of the Holocaust. We were not there. We were not there then, but we are here now. So shine brightly, Christians United for Israel. We are 8 million plus points of light, and light always conquers the darkness. CUFI was born for such a time as this. Shine the light, shine the light, shine the light. May God bless Israel, and may God bless the Jewish people, and may God bless America and our president, and may God bless CUFI as it conquers the darkness, and may God bless each and every one of you. 8 million torches of light that terrifies the darkness. God bless you all. It is my distinct privilege to introduce to you His Excellency Ron Dermer, Israel's ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Dermer has served in his current position since October 2013. During his tenure in Washington, Ambassador Dermer has worked closely with Christians United for Israel leadership to strengthen support for Israel among American Christians. He opposed the misguided Iran nuclear deal, which threatened the safety of Israel and America. Ambassador Dermer encouraged President Trump to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He has joined us several times at the CUFI Washington Summit on behalf of the State of Israel. Please give your attention to Ambassador Ron Dermer.
Welcome. I'm Sandra Parker, Chairwoman of the CUFI Action Fund. Ambassador Dermer, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here from the Golda Room and Israel's Embassy in Washington.
Wonderful. Well, let's get right to it. We've all been reading the reports and watching the headlines. What are you able to tell us about Trump's peace proposal in terms of where it is right now? And specifically, what can you tell us about Israel possibly extending its sovereignty over portions of Judea and Samaria?
So I'm glad you asked me that. First, let's take a step back and remember that the Trump administration unveiled the peace plan in January. So it's about 5 months ago. And this peace plan was very different than other peace plans that came before it. The reason it's similar to other plans is that it does call for a two-state solution, and it does ask Israel to make territorial compromises for peace, but the similarities sort of end there between this plan and other plans that we've seen in the past, because what's different about it is, first of all, it recognizes the validity of Israel's legal, historic, moral claim to these territories, Judea and Samaria, which is our ancestral homeland. Those are the territories, where the patriarchs of the Jewish people prayed, where our prophets preached, and where our kings ruled. And it recognized that the Jewish people have a claim to those territories. This peace plan also takes Israel's security concerns very seriously and gives concrete ways where Israel would be able to defend itself by itself under sort of any contingencies that could happen in the future. And other peace plans paid lip service to Israel's security, but they didn't actually put the mechanisms in place that enabled us actually to protect ourselves. On almost any of these final status issues, the so-called final status issues, the Trump plan is very different than its predecessors. For instance, most of the other plans have called on Israel to return more or less to the 1967 boundaries. Now, one of my most illustrious predecessors, Abba Eban, called those Auschwitz borders. And Israel's not going to return to the 67 lines or anywhere close to the 1967 lines. Other peace plans and proposals that have been floated have called for international forces, international troops to protect Israel from Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Of course, that is unacceptable to Israel. We've seen how those forces have worked in other areas around us. This plan makes sure that Israel has security control west of the Jordan River. Other plans have called for a division of Jerusalem. And even they were talking about the Temple Mount and maybe dividing it, top down or side to side. This plan makes David's capital, which is the heart and soul of the Jewish people, for 3,000 years, it remains under Israeli sovereignty. And then another issue is the so-called refugee issue, which are essentially the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of refugees, Palestinian refugees from the War of Independence, a war that was launched by the Arabs against the state of Israel. Many people claim that these descendants of these refugees, which are several million at this point, that they have a quote-unquote right to return to Israel. And this plan makes it clear, no, they don't. They don't have a right to return. And while the refugee issue should be resolved, it should be resolved outside of Israel's borders. And the final thing is on the whole question of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. The debate among other plans, various plans that are out there, is how many tens of thousands of Jews do we have to throw out of their homes in order for us to have peace with the Palestinians? And this plan sort of rejects the idea of ethnic cleansing in principle and says no Jew, no Arab will be thrown out of their homes. And so I think it is a sea change to what we've seen in the past. Now, both the prime minister and his then political rival and current defense minister and alternate prime minister Benjamin Gantz, they came to Washington in January and they said, this is a good plan for Israel. It's a good plan for the Palestinians. It's a good plan for peace. And they said that they would negotiate based on this plan, this Trump peace plan, which does call for a two-state solution. They said, we are prepared to negotiate on the basis of this plan with the Palestinians. The Palestinians, of course, rejected it. They've rejected every plan for the last century. They have not sat down for good faith negotiations with Israel for the last 10 years. They don't feel they have to because they kept seeing the goalposts move closer and closer to them, to their side. And here, the Trump administration puts forward, which I think a very, very good plan. And now the question is, what do we do? You do not have Palestinians who are willing to negotiate with you. And therefore, there is an understanding between Israel and the United States that we are going to move forward in the context of the Trump peace plan. That Israel would apply its laws to territories in Judea and Samaria that the Trump plan designates as being part of Israel in the future. And if those people are interested in what territories we're talking about, they should go look at the map that was put forward by the Trump administration at the time. It includes the Jordan Valley. It includes the so-called blocks of Jewish communities and other territories that are vital for Israel's security and national interest. So Israel would move forward, apply its laws to territories the Trump plan designates as part of Israel in the future, and it would not apply its laws to territory the Trump plan designates for a future Palestinian state. And in order to win U.S. recognition for this move, we would also have to make a commitment to not build in those territories that are designated for a future Palestinian state, which essentially means you're setting aside territory for the Palestinians to see if they would be willing in the years ahead to come into good faith negotiations and to negotiate a peace which, as I said, would be good for Israel, good for the Palestinians. Now, where it's standing right now, and this is a short answer to a very long question, but where it's standing right now is that U.S. officials are in Israel now, and we are trying to work out the final details of exactly which territory Israel would be applying its laws to, and of course, get U.S. recognition for that, and hopefully the Palestinians and our regional neighbors and also people around the world will understand that Israel is not doing this to end the possibility of a political solution with the Palestinians, but actually to advance the possibility of a political solution with the Palestinians. Because those other plans, Sandra, that are out there that call for these things like returning to the 67 lines or international forces or dividing Jerusalem, they are unacceptable to the people of Israel. And therefore, I think we as a people have to show what our red lines are, and that we are not willing to accept those proposals, and that we are united around a real peace plan that offers, I think, genuine hope for the future.
Thank you, Ambassador. And in that same vein, what do you think that it's going to take for the Palestinian Authority to actually do right by its people, end its war of attrition and demonization against the state of Israel?
Well, they would have to cross a psychological Rubicon that they haven't crossed for over 100 years. Even before the establishment of the state of Israel, they refused to recognize the legitimacy of a nation state for the Jewish people in any boundary. That has always been our problem. In 1947, when the UN offered its partition plan, they put forward a plan that was 2 states for 2 peoples. Then it was a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Palestinians didn't call themselves Palestinians at that point. My mother is from pre-state Israel in 1936. On her birth certificate, it says Palestine, because that's the territory that the British administered at the time. And there were Palestinian Jews and there were Palestinian Arabs. At that time in 1947, the UN offered a proposal. 2 states for 2 peoples, one a Jewish state and one an Arab state. The issue was not refugees. There were no refugees at the time. The issue was not settlements. There were no post-67 settlements. This is 20 years before. The issue, Sandra, wasn't even Jerusalem. Jerusalem was put in a different category by the international community. It was just, do you accept and recognize the right of the Jewish people to a state in any boundary? And the Arab world and the Palestinians among them rejected it then. And the Palestinians, at least, have rejected this in all the decades since. And they have not crossed this psychological Rubicon to recognize our right to be in the land of Israel. Not just to recognize our might, that we're a powerful country with an army that can defend ourselves, but not just that we have the might, but we also have a right to be here. And what they do, and you've seen this, they deny history. They deny a historic connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. That's why Arafat went to Camp David in the year 2000 and told President Clinton that there never was a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. You know, I don't know when Jesus was flipping the table of the money changers at the time, what he was doing there. There was never a temple on the Temple Mount, and he told that to President Clinton at the time. And Abu Mazen, President Abbas, the current Palestinian leader, never recognized a connection between Jewish people as a people in the land of Israel. Why? Why do they say these things? Because if they recognize our historic connection to this land, then they would be recognizing in their minds a right for us to be in this land. They want to cast us as foreign colonialists in the land of Israel. They want to tell their children that the Jewish people in the land of Israel are like the British in India or the French in Algeria or the Belgians in the Congo. They want to say that the land of Israel to the Jews is like Uganda would be to the Jews. It's not. This is the land, as I said, where the patriarchs of the Jewish people prayed, where our prophets preached, and where our kings ruled. And what we need is a Palestinian leader to finally recognize this historic connection. They understand, the leadership, that once that recognition happens, the entire scaffolding of their rejectionism of Israel will collapse, which is so, they refuse so much to do it. We need a Palestinian leader who will care more about the Palestinians than he does the Palestinian cause. And what I mean by that is the Palestinian cause, unfortunately, for the last 100 years, has not been to establish a Palestinian state. It has been to destroy the one and only Jewish state, or to prevent it from being established, and then after it was established, to try to destroy it. We need somebody who cares about Palestinians, because a leader that who cares about Palestinians, they will seek peace with Israel, because that will be good for Palestinians. And leaders who care about a cause that has been about the destruction of Israel for so long, they don't want peace with Israel. So we need to see this historic shift. It hasn't happened yet. The good news is, in the Arab world around us, there is a growing recognition of, and I think acceptance of Israel in a more fundamental way. It's slow, but it is actually happening, and hopefully that process will continue.
Well, that dovetails nicely into the next question, which turns to other areas in the region. We've seen a lot coming from the IAEA concerning Iran. What do you think the US and Europe are going to have to do in order to ensure that Iran's nuclear ambitions are truly thwarted as opposed to merely delayed?
Well, it's a good question, and it also means that we need to also take a step back and understand that 5 years ago, in July of 2015, the international community, the so-called P5+1, which is the permanent members of the Security Council along with Germany, got together and made a deal with the Iranians. And it was a very, very dangerous deal, that nuclear deal, because it did not block Iran's path to a bomb. It paved Iran's path to a bomb. And the reason why it paved it is all the restrictions the deal puts in place are automatically removed over a few years. Some of them are removed in 5 years, and that's the situation we're having right now with the arms embargo, which is one of the first sunsets in the deal. Some in 8 years, like missiles, some in 10 years, centrifuges, 15 years stockpiles. So it didn't solve the problem. It didn't even delay the problem, because while this deal is going on, Iran was permitted under the deal to do research and development of advanced centrifuges, which helps them spin uranium faster, and that's what you need to make a bomb. And so you had a deal that was made that did not prevent Iran and not block Iran's path to the bomb, but actually paved that path. And in addition to that, it also removed all the sanctions on Iran to get that deal. And those sanctions led to huge money pouring into Iran. And it's not just tens of billions, it's hundreds of billions of dollars, because as Iran starts selling oil on the financial markets, they're able to get a huge money going into the coffers. And I'd love to tell you, Sandra, that the Iranian government used that money to establish a GI Bill for returning members of the Revolutionary Guard. But what it did is it used that money to fuel its campaign of conquest throughout the region, in Iraq, Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and it made a dangerous Iran that much richer. Now, what happened is, when Trump came to office, he said, I'm getting rid of this deal. And in his first year in office, he refused to certify it. In his second year, in 2018, he withdrew the United States from the nuclear deal, and he restored sanctions. A year later, he got rid of all the oil waivers. And this year, he just got rid of additional waivers, nuclear waivers, and has put massive, massive pressure on this regime. And he has fundamentally shifted the strategic situation in the region. You had Iran with the wind at its back about 3.5 years ago, and now they're facing a hurricane force of headwinds because of all the pressures. And just to explain to your viewers, 2 years ago when President Trump left the deal, Iran was selling 2.8 million barrels of oil a day. And a few months ago, they were down already to 300,000 barrels a day. It's 2.5 million barrels less. And mostly over the course of these couple of years, the price of oil that went down and now is back up again was about $60 a barrel. 2.5 million barrels a day, that's $150 million a day. That's $4.5 billion a month. That's $50 billion year after year. And it could be growing, that Iran can use to fuel its campaign throughout the region. So President Trump has shifted it. And now, we're at a situation where the U.S. wants to extend the first, the arms embargo, which is the first of the clauses that are being removed, these sunset clauses, and has made clear that if the international community doesn't back the extension of the arms embargo, that they are going to snap back U.S. sanctions and pull the plug on this deal once and for all. And Israel fully supports the United States effort to do it. And we think it's very important. This is a deal that's on life support right now, and the United States should pull the plug on this deal and should move into a completely different place, putting enormous pressures on this regime and force the regime to dismantle its military nuclear capability. The previous deal didn't do it. Any future deal, that has to be what happens. And we hope the United States will continue on that path.
And Ambassador, to the extent the U.S. Resolution to extend the arms embargo, as you mentioned, fails, what is Israel's diplomatic contingency plan should it do so?
Well, look, our major contingency plan is that we always reserve the right to defend ourselves, and the Prime Minister has made clear that he will do whatever he has to do in order to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. We are not going to allow a regime that vows every day to destroy the one and only Jewish state and works every day to destroy the one and only Jewish state, to develop the means to achieve that goal. And I think it was shameful that the international community made a deal with such a regime. The Iranian leaders, days after they're signing this deal, or not signing, or made the deal with the international community, were tweeting out about the destruction of Israel. Tweeting out. And I think we are in living memory of the Holocaust. And the fact that the leading powers of the world made an agreement with a regime that openly calls for the destruction of Israel and would sort of embrace them and bring them into the international community rather than reject it, say that they completely dismantle their military and nuclear capability and completely end their designs to destroy Israel. I think it was shameful what happened, and we deeply appreciate that President Trump has really created a hinge of history and changed the trajectory of this deal. And we hope it will continue, because it is not just for Israel's national security. It also affects our Arab neighbors, which Iran threatens, and ultimately they threaten you. We are, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said many times, Israel in their minds, we are the little Satan. You are the great Satan. The intercontinental ballistic missiles that Iran is developing, I have news for people. Israel's on the same continent as Iran. Those intercontinental ballistic missiles are not for us. They're for you. And this is a regime that threatens everybody in the region and threatens the peace and security of the entire world. And we're so appreciative that President Trump took the stance he did against Iran. And hopefully that pressure will continue until we fully dismantle Iran's military and nuclear capability.
And turning now to another insidious enemy our members are very familiar with, boycott, divest, and sanction, BDS. What would you say to those who support this movement, and specifically some European countries that are instigating BDS activity?
Well, first I would say that BDS is an anti-Semitic movement. I think it's very important to say that clearly. And that many people who engage in BDS activity, they should know, while they may not intentionally think that they're perpetrating anti-Semitism or advancing anti-Semitism, it may not be an intent, but it is an effect. Why is BDS an anti-Semitic movement? Why would I sort of pin that scarlet letter A? And that's not a charge that I put lightly. You know, I'm 7 years ambassador here, and you could look at public statements, and the number of people who I've said are anti-Semitic are very, very small. I'm very cautious about using that word because I think it should only be used in the most extreme circumstances. BDS is one of those circumstances because it singles Israel out. It singles the Jewish state out alone among nations of the world for this treatment. So when somebody is putting forward something that has to do with BDS, and they come to me as an ambassador and they say, well, what do you think about this initiative? Maybe it's an academic group, maybe it's a church group that decides to advance BDS. What do you think about this? Well, I say to them, my first question is, what number are we on their list? Is Israel number 30 on the list of countries they're boycotting, number 50, number 70, number 80? Because if that's the case, then I know I'm dealing with people who have a principle. They've applied this principle widely. They've caught many countries in their net. And I figure that my job as ambassador of Israel is to explain to them why they're wrong. But when I hear that Israel is the only country in the world that is being singled out for boycott, then there's a name for actually singling out the Jewish state. It's the same name for singling out the Jewish people, and that is anti-Semitism. And the fact that you could have academic groups doing this, to a country where academics are free to say what they want, write what they want, think what they want, and in a world where many academics who do not fall in line with the government and the powers that be are thrown in prison or even worse, only makes this BDS movement so much more outrageous. And the fact that a Christian group, any so-called Christian group, would call for the boycott or sanctioning of Israel. We live in a Middle East where Christian communities, ancient Christian communities, have been decimated, where Christians are literally decapitated. Christians were 20% of the Middle East a century ago. They're about 4% today. There is only one state in the entire region that has a growing, thriving Christian community, several times greater than it was when we were established, and that is the state of Israel. And I think that you have Christian groups who'd argue to divest or boycott Israel just makes it more obscene. And I have to tell you, Sandra, I'm very thankful and grateful to CUFI for leading this struggle in so many different states. And I think it represents a shift in the nature of the relationship between Jews and Christians. And it's something that Pastor Hagee has spearheaded for decades, and you continue in that path that we have moved, Jews and Christians, from a relationship of historic enmity, hostility, towards friendship, and now it's a relationship of partnership. And all those centuries of anti-Semitism, between Christian anti-Semitism towards Jews, you see now a completely a different position, where CUFI activists throughout the United States are going to the state legislatures and they're arguing to stop this BDS activity. They are actually spearheading the effort to stop this modern form of anti-Semitism, which is why we are so grateful for the action. And I would tell everybody who's engaged in BDS activity to stop, to think about what they're doing, and understand that this is anti-Semitism. And we live in a world where everyone is condemning hate speech. Well, it's got to be hatred for Jews as well. Jew hatred is the oldest, most malleable hatred, and that should be on everybody's list of hatreds that we want to consign to the dustbin of history.
That's right. Turning to something a little bit more lighthearted, you talked about being in your post for 7 years, and we know that sadly this is coming to a close, though you promised not to be a stranger. Let me ask you first, when you initially heard that you were going to be the ambassador, an American-born Israeli, where were you when you got that news, and what reaction did you have? What was that feeling like for you?
Well, the Prime Minister called me. I was in my home in Jerusalem, our capital, recognized by the United States finally, and he told me that he wanted me to serve as Israel's ambassador to the United States. And the first feeling I had was a deep sense of honor that I had the privilege to serve in that capacity, because obviously Israel is a country that I moved to and I love dearly, but I also love the United States. I was born and raised here, and I was educated by the wisdom of your founders. And when I think of freedom, I think of Lincoln. And when I think of courage, I think of Normandy. And when I think of justice, I think of Martin Luther King Jr. So I've been inspired by so much of the United States, and to serve in this country, of all countries in the world, I think has a real special meaning to me. As I said, my mother was born in pre-state Israel. My father was born in the United States. So you can say that the U.S.-Israel relationship is literally in my DNA. And it has been a great a privilege to serve. I would say that after that initial sense of being honored for the position, the feeling that I had more than anything else was a sense of heaviness. Actually, I've had that a couple times in my life before, where the sense of responsibility that I felt that was on my shoulders, because this is the most important relationship we have in the world, it just was weighing on my shoulders. I remember in the first day, and you get used to bearing that weight as you stay in the job, but the weight is always there because you recognize, at least I recognize, how important and vital this relationship is for the state of Israel, and how privileged I feel that I've been able to serve in that capacity for the last 7 years.
And you talk about the relationship with the U.S. and Israel. We're kind of at the precipice right now of change in the world. Israel has a new government. We're coming up on an election year. Where do you see the U.S.-Israel relationship heading at a time when, unfortunately, support for Israel is becoming partisanized to a certain extent. Where do you see that relationship in the future?
Well, I think, Sandra, that Israel is going to be the most important ally of the United States in the 21st century. And I say that not because we agree with President Trump on the nuclear deal, his position on the nuclear deal with Iran, or on the peace process. I actually said that statement. I made that statement in the first speech I was privileged to give as a sitting Israeli ambassador on our Independence Day in 2014. Then National Security Advisor Susan Rice was standing next to me, and I said, Israel will be the most important ally of the United States in the 21st century for two reasons: security and technology. When you think about your security partners in the world, and when you think about security, think about a military that can defend itself by itself. Think about an intel, a country with powerful intel capability that can give you intelligence that you need to keep your soldiers and your civilians safe, and also to help your allies. Think about a country with a global cyber capability. Think about a country that can make weapons that can protect your people in the future. When you think about it, you're sort of down to a much smaller group of countries, probably Israel and Great Britain. But now think about technology. As the United States wants to maintain its leading position in technology against other powers or superpowers, I think Israel is a tremendous ally in all of these cutting-edge technologies of the future, whether it's artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, all sorts of things that are happening. Israel is the second great center of innovation in the world after Silicon Valley. It's in Israel. And I think as you see which powers are emerging in the fields of technology, Israel's really the only one that's an ally. So I'm very bullish on the U.S.-Israel relationship. I think sometimes it gets hidden behind disagreements that could happen between governments. And it can also get hidden behind agreements. Just because you disagree on this or that policy or agree on this or that policy doesn't mean that the tectonic plates are pushing closer together or further apart. We have a unique alliance, and I believe that this alliance will grow even stronger in the years ahead. And what I said in 2014 may seem less absurd today, even though I'm an ambassador of a country the size of New Jersey, all of 8 million people, or over 9 million people now. How could you possibly be the most important ally? Look in 10 years, by 2030, what I just said to you today will seem totally obvious that yes, Israel is the most important ally, but we have to continue to build on it. We have to continue to strengthen it all the time. And hopefully we'll continue to work with both sides of the aisle to make this relationship stronger and stronger decade after decade.
Amen. Ambassador, in closing, you've been on the front lines of history. What are some of the moments that stand out for you in your role? Whether it's the darkest moment, the brightest moment, what will you tell your children and your grandchildren around the table from your time spent as ambassador?
Well, there are two dark moments that definitely stand out. One of them was the nuclear deal that was signed by the leading powers. As I said, I think it was a shameful act by the international community and an act of appeasement that we had not seen in the world since the 1930s. That was the worst day. A second very bad day I remember was the decision by the UN Security Council in December 2016 to pass Resolution 2334, which declared the heartland of our country, the biblical heartland of our ancestral homeland, declared all of that to be occupied Palestinian territory. All the territory past the 67 lines, including most absurdly the Western Wall. This is occupied Palestinian territory. And I remember the applause of the delegates at the United Nations. I'd never seen them applaud anything in the Security Council, but they actually were applauding. I will never forget that. And I thought to myself at the time that when King David was ruling in Jerusalem, none of those nations existed. That's what I thought at the time. And they are saying that this is occupied Palestinian territory when our patriarchs and prophets and kings were ruling in those territories did not. The Chinese are an old people, but I think in the modern form, they didn't have the state that they have today. And so you're talking about 3,000 years, and here you have these nations of the world applauding this just absurd decision, which I think set back very much the cause of peace. As for the positive moments, the brightest moments, it was in the previous administration, we were able, despite differences that we have over policy, to iron out a an MOU, a memorandum of understanding on military assistance for the next 10 years. That was certainly a high point. And then President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as our capital, move the embassy to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And also the decision, the most important decision in my view that President Trump made was to withdraw from the nuclear deal for all the reasons that I explained before. But that's still not the brightest spot, because those are decisions that American officials made, both the good decisions and the bad decisions. For me, the single most important decision was the decision of Prime Minister Netanyahu to come and speak out against the nuclear deal with Iran. He came alone among world leaders to the United States and spoke in Congress against a deal that he believes and that I believe is a threat to the very survival of the state of Israel. And in doing so, he fulfilled his most fundamental moral obligation to speak out, because the Jewish people did not have the power to speak out 80 years ago. We did not have a sovereign state. We did not have a voice. We did not have a refuge. We did not have a shield. Today we have a voice, and the Prime Minister of Israel used that voice in Congress, and that we say at least that we spoke to the world. We warned them of this danger. We also have the power to defend ourselves, and if forced to, we will use that power. But that, to me, by far was the brightest spot in the years I've been here. And I hope, about the other part of your question, in terms of my children are still young. I have 5 children. My eldest is only 16, and they've experienced this time in Washington with me together. I hope that they will realize that I did whatever I could during the years that I've been here to do sort of my part in securing our future. You know, I think that we're always in a relay race, and you have a baton and it's passed to you and you get one of these positions, like being an ambassador, or certainly at the highest level being prime minister. You are passed that baton and you have to run your leg of the race. The race keeps going on and on and on and on and on, but you have to run your leg of the race and hopefully pass it to the next person with a bigger lead than I suppose than you had it, and in a better position. And I hope that they will think that I did my part to help secure the Jewish future. That's exactly how I see my role. And finally, that they'll realize, which I have tried to tell them throughout this period, that the most remarkable thing about being an ambassador of Israel is that there are ambassadors of Israel. Yeah. Because, as I said, we were not a sovereign state for 2,000 years. And the fact that we were able to come back to our land, return to our land, and to rebuild our sovereignty and to ingather our exiles, as the ancient prophets foretold, is a miracle of modern times. And they know that they've met a lot of ambassadors over the years who've come to our table, usually for Shabbat. We will have other ambassadors over for meals, and they've encountered many of them. They have never encountered the ambassador of Babylon. Mm-hmm. They've never encountered in Washington the ambassador of Imperial Rome. And they have not encountered the ambassador of the 1,000-Year Reich. But we do have ambassadors of Israel. And for that, I hope that they will be grateful and continue to do whatever they can do in whatever capacity they're in to run their leg of the race and to help secure our future.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, and humbly on behalf of Pastor Hagee, all of the members of Christians United for Israel, we see your legacy as secure, as concrete. You are a shining example of what it means to not keep silent for Zion's sake. We know that your title may be changing in the future. Your invitation to CUFI shall remain. Thank you so much for joining us today. God bless you for all that you've done for our 2 nations.
Thank you to the Hagee family for helping mobilize the real grassroots support in this country among devout Christians for the state of Israel. It's a sea change, and we are deeply grateful. We do not take it for granted, and we appreciate all the work that all of you do day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and decade after decade to make this alliance the most powerful alliance. And no matter where we go and what we do, we know that you will have Israel's back.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Israel, Lockheed Martin and the partnership with the State of Israel stems decades of global defense solutions since the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948. From the Lockheed Martin Constellation to the F-16, C-130, and today with the fifth-generation fighter jet, the F-35I Adir. Israel is a strategic partner to Lockheed Martin and F-35. The Israeli Air Force, IAF, is the first air force outside the U.S. to achieve many major F-35 program milestones. The first foreign military sales country to select the F-35 in October 2010 to lead its Air Force. The first international country to declare initial operational capability. And the first country to use the F-35A in combat operations. Many local industries help support the F-35 program, with Israeli men and women helping build the F-35, not only for the Israeli F-35, but for all other partners around the world. Elbit Systems builds the helmet-mounted display systems and composite structures for all F-35s around the world. And the Israeli aerospace industries produces hundreds of wing sets and skins to help the F-35 safeguard our skies. Israeli men and women touch and positively impact every F-35 that rolls off the production line. The F-35 strengthens Israeli national security and empowers economic growth across the region. The Adir provides Israel with a qualitative military edge in the region and ensures the protection of the state. Today, there are two IAF F-35 squadrons, ensuring the IAF remains at the front with fifth-generation capabilities. These transformational capabilities of the F-35 provide the Israeli Air Force with the tools to execute missions and return home safe. The F-35 Lightning II, the most lethal, survivable, and connected aircraft in the world. The F-35, ready to protect and defend Israel.
It is my honor to introduce Ambassador David Friedman, the United States Ambassador to Israel. Ambassador Friedman has been a pro-Israel activist for decades, and in his current position, he has been dedicated to expanding the security of both the United States and Israel by advocating prospects of peace in the region. When he was appointed, Ambassador Friedman stated that he was determined to ensure America is a better friend to Israel than it was in the previous administration, and he has successfully worked toward that end. Last year, Christians United for Israel presented him with a Defender of Israel Award because of his service in defense of the covenant nation of Israel and her people. Ladies and gentlemen, please give your close attention to my dear friend, Ambassador David Friedman.
It is a great honor to appear before so many lovers and supporters of the State of Israel. My deepest thanks to my dear friend, Pastor John Hagee, along with the entire Hagee family and the entire leadership and membership of CUFI. I will never forget May 14th, 2018, the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence. On that date, I was privileged to preside over the opening ceremony of the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. At that ceremony, Pastor Hagee brought the entire house down with his stirring closing benediction. The entire audience, at Pastor Hagee's urging, shouted as one, "Israel lives." It was a moment that both of us will always cherish. Today, Israel indeed lives as never before, thanks to its leadership, its incredible citizens, and its loyal friends like Pastor Hagee and President Donald Trump. Thank you, CUFI, for all you do. Thank you for speaking up loudly and clearly for the State of Israel. Thank you for your consistent message to the people of Israel, people surrounded by enemies in all directions, people who, against all odds,